What is up, YouTube? I've got another tier list for you. This is for Duskmourn Standard. I've been having a ton of fun with this set. I assume most of you are as well. It's been really cool. There's definitely some very powerful decks running around, very powerful cards added from Duskmourn, and it's really impacted the meta a lot. So I'm pretty excited to just kind of get right into this tier list and start looking at, how these decks kind of pan out as far as, what I've seen on the ladder personally, what I've played. I've played a good amount of these decks, and I've definitely played against all of them. And yeah, they're very strong. The meta is very different, and it's very cool. Very cool. I'm having a ton of fun playing Standard right now. I assume a lot of you guys are as well. Let's get into the decks and start talking about each one. The first deck we've got for you is the Caretaker's Talent. This could be the Jeskai version, Boros mono white. I do think the mono white version is the best, and that's the one I'll link for you guys. This did win like an MTGO challenge or something pretty recently, and it's good. The reason being, I'm gonna put it A tier. I don't think it's quite S, but the reason I think the mono white version is the best is because I really do think we're in such an aggressive meta at the moment that you need answers early for the various aggro decks that are running around. There's just so much aggro. Every deck is doing things incredibly quickly and doing really powerful things even by like turn 2 or turn 3. So you really need an answer. You need that Elspeth Smite or the laydown arms. That is partially why mono white is so strong comparatively to the others, that you can play laydown arms. And you get the benefit of never having, there's a consistency aspect, right? You're never going to have a tapped land on turn 2, right? You're always just going to have planes to play that are going to come in untapped, and you have an answer. Now, it is weak to certain combo decks that are running around, but to be fair, there's really not much combo. I think, last couple weeks ago, we talked about Squirmy Emergence and how good it was, but there's so many decks that are doing things with the graveyard now that Squirming Emergence just isn't good enough, and there's so much graveyard hate, it's just kind of been pushed out of the meta. So I haven't even added it to this tier list, but I don't think it's really very good right now or very playable. Let's move on to the next one, and we've got the kind of, I put this as I put Slick Shot here, and I'm gonna put this top of A tier. This would be any of the like red leyline decks, the Rakdos one or the Gruul one. They're both like very good. They simply win games, and they kind of have been shaping the meta a bit. The reason they're not in S is because the meta has shaped around them, and they are, they do lose to some of the other decks that we're going to talk about. And they obviously they're very strong. They've shaped the meta a bit around them, but there's other decks that can compete and that have good favorable matchups into them that also beat other decks. So I think that while they are like an absolute like tier 1 deck or an A tier deck, I wouldn't put them in S tier just yet, because they, there is ways to beat it. Like we were saying, like the Caretaker's deck, the best version mono white, running laydown arms, running Elspeth Smites, just able to compete. I played a Boros version of the Caretaker's Talent decks, and I was running High Noon. High Noon is a great answer into them. For those who don't know, High Noon is a 2-mana enchantment that each player can only play one spell a turn. So shuts down the spell spam of these decks. Next deck we got here, and this is kind of one I saw earlier. I did want to include it because it's still pretty popular, is the blue-white enchantment. They're running like Sheltered by Ghosts, they're running the Gremlin Tamer, the 2/3 that draws each time an enchantment comes. This deck's pretty good. It's pretty strong. It's a little too, I would say it's just a little slower than it needs to be. And it kind of, while it gets the value, it doesn't do anything in particular very well. It has some good protection, it has some good countering, it has good pressure, it has some good draw, but it does all these things and it doesn't do anything insanely or exceptionally well. So I'm going to put that in B tier for now. I don't think it's a top tier deck. It's a fun deck. It's very cool, but yeah, as far as like, if we're looking at, best decks to play climb with on standard, this would not be one of them for me. Okay, we have an interesting one here. I didn't know what to kind of put as the thumbnail for this this deck, but this would be Boros Enchantments. This is going straight up to S tier. This deck is crazy good. It is an aggro deck that beats other aggro decks. I think this is probably, best deck in the meta for me right now. It's so strong. Shelter by Ghost is really, really powerful. You're playing the new 1-drop that gives +1/+1 for each enchantment. You're running the new enchantment that gives +1/+1 for each enchantment that you control. So you get just giant dude. You play Shard Mage Rescue, which is 1 mana +1/+1 enchantment that gives hexproof for the turn. So you've got that protection. The deck is pretty. It's very fun to play. As someone who doesn't love playing, it's a little bit more interesting than just like slam dudes and then kill your person on turn 2, right? You can still kill people on turn 2 with this deck, turn 3 with this deck, but you do have a lot more interaction. So the game's just a little bit more interesting, and you can really beat anything with this deck. It is a little bit slower than just the standard like Slick Shot. I mean, you do run Slick Shot in this deck because it's a very good card, but the Slick Shot, Gruul, Prowess kind of thing where you're just slamming cards down on turn 2, turn 3, and ending the game. But having Sheltered by Ghost, you're able to deal with any person that is any other aggro deck, because Sheltered by Ghost gives Ward 2 and lifelink, so they cannot race you. Absolutely cannot race you. Really, really good deck. If you want to climb, I think this is probably your best bet. Very, very, very strong. Next deck we got here, and this deck has fallen off quite a bit, is like the Demir decks. I'm going to put this in C. I actually don't think Demir right now is very good at all. It just has no place in the meta. That is the problem. Like, they have some really great cards. They've got, as far as new cards go, they have like Slasher and the Curiosity. So they have like very strong cards, but the problem I think with Demir right now is it just loses too hard to aggro, and it just doesn't have good matchups. Like in reality, I feel like Demir really shines when there's good control decks running around, and there's no good control decks. I think there's maybe one that we'll talk about later, but it's not. Demir shines against control decks. It's as simple as that. It tempos them out and it counters everything that they do, but it just can't handle aggro and it can't handle mid range. So this is as strong as it was, I don't think it's super strong right now. I could be, this might be a hot take, but I really do think it is a C tier. Like I think I'd rather play everything else other than Demir. I don't find it particularly strong. I think that cut down is not a great answer into red. And they have some, like, they got some new interesting spells that I think could be powerful, and like I think the deck is strong. But when it comes to the current meta, it's not great. Next deck we got are all the kind of mono black decks. I'm gonna put this as Slasher because this card is very, very cool. That's the 2/3 Death Touch that does half. They lose half their life every time this thing hits, and it revives itself. The card is very strong. It's like so I've seen a number of black decks. I think the decks are very, very good. Like it's they run just a ton of removal, and then they'll run like Slasher, and then they'll have like Bloodletter. So that's like a 2-card combo they just can lose to, right? And I've seen like Rush of Dread. I've even just seen just mono black Control where they're running like Liliana's. So all those mono black decks I think are actually pretty good. They run a ton of removal. A little bit, they're very consistent in like mana base wise because you're only in one color. A little bit better to deal with, definitely better to deal with against like aggro than Demir, because I feel like the blue side in Demir is just not useful, and all your little like 2/1s, like cut down is your best card against aggro, and even that's like not that great. Whereas like here you're running cut downs, but you're also running like all, you can run all your copies of Go for the Throats. You can run the new enchantment that's like gives -3/-3. It's really, really solid. And yeah, there's not much to say. I think any deck that's like kind of a mid-rangey control, and then you just have this you have this combo. We saw it with Golgari Talents, where you had talent, and then you would run Vraska just to end the game at any time. That's like a very, very strong combo. Sometimes you just play Slasher on turn 3, they don't have an answer. You play Bloodletters on turn 4, they don't have an answer. You swing, you win the game. Like it's happened to me. I've played against it. It's happened to me. I'm like, all right, guess I got to go to game 2, right? So very, very strong deck. A pretty easy combo to do, and yeah, like and they're just good cards. Otherwise, like it's just kind of like a pile of good cards, and with a combo tacked on. Next deck we got, and this has been my personal favorite deck, is the Oculus Djinn Azorious Tempo deck. This deck is sweet. I can't not put this in S tier. There is a slight issue with this deck, which would be that it completely gets destroyed by Rest in Peace. So you do have to play with Rest in Peace, and you have to play around the Rest in Peace, try to counter it, or Soul Partition it and counter it later, or bounce it with Into the Floodmaw. But this deck is absolutely great. It destroys aggro decks for the most part. Like you're gonna win against aggro decks. You're gonna win against most of the mid-range piles. They just can't deal with it. And like honestly, control, it depends on the control deck for sure. I know against the next deck we're going to talk about, it's not a great matchup, but it's just a very, very good deck. The problem with this deck, and why I wouldn't put it number 1, is Rest in Peace. Like Leyline the Void you can play around because you run bounces. So like they played Leyline the Void, comes out on turn 0 or whatever, right? They play it before the game starts, and then you can bounce it, right? And you can fill your graveyard up, and Leyline the Void does not get rid of cards in your graveyard. So you can play around Leyline the Void. However, Rest in Peace, every time they play it, it just removes every single card that you have in your graveyard. So it's not, you can't just bounce it, right? You have to bounce it and counter it, right? So it's a little, and you also just always have to hold up a counter for them to play it. So it's just really, really hard to play against. Rest in Peace, not impossible, but it's very, very difficult. But yeah, I mean, tier 1 for me. There's so many games where skip land drop on turn 1 if I'm on the draw, right? Discard my Oculus, and then Helping Hand on turn 2. You get, you're playing this 5/5 flyer that shouldn't even be allowed to be played on turn 3. And you start manifesting, you get 7 worth of stats by turn 2. It's pretty strong. It's Oculus has, I think, really solidified or really strengthened the Azorius deck. I think the problem with that deck before was there wasn't a great way to get, you had all these Helping Hands and you're doing this really powerful thing, but you couldn't get advantages with your cards. You would run out of cards, and you couldn't just, if you had 0 cards in hand and you slam Djinn, they remove Djinn, you kind of just lose. Whereas this, it's like, or even if you get a couple attacks in with Djinn, like, and you're not winning the game, you're not getting any advantage, and they don't really feel any need to remove it. But with this, this needs to be removed almost immediately. It fills up the graveyard. It pulls Djinns out of your deck. It pulls other Oculi out of your deck. So you like this thing needs to be removed. It's absolutely strongest card in the deck for sure. There's a reason I put this as the thumbnail and not Djinn. The Djinn's nice. Like he's very nice when you are against another control deck because you're against a control deck and you can fight over these counter spells and you just have more mana than them. Like that's great and all, but a lot of times I'm just, you know, if I have to choose 90% of the time, I'm reviving Oculus over Djinn. Just because, I mean, you can even hit more Djinns off of it. So it's like you get to draw 2 cards, right? You get to dig deeper to find your other Oculus, and you get to fill up your graveyard, which makes your Djinn stronger and lets you play your Oculus if you draw it, right? Okay, the last deck we got is the Overlord kind of Bant Control list, and I'm gonna put that bottom of A tier. I think this deck's pretty good. It just, for me personally, when I was playing this deck, it just didn't have the greatest matchups into aggro. I think it's kind of up to whether you kind of just have to draw right, but it's really, really strong. It beats out the Azorious Tempo list really, really hard, and I think that's partially what's keeping it up in A tier for me. I haven't played it against the tokens deck, but you know, I could imagine it being a grind fest. You probably win because you just go like a little bit, you know, you just have a little bit too many threats for them to deal with, as well as like Sunfall doesn't hit your enchantments. So it's definitely a pretty solid deck, but I'm going to put it bottom of A tier. I think if you're a control player and you're picking between, you know, what control list to play, I'd probably pick the mono white one, but both are like pretty good. The mono white one is just better into aggro. It's as simple as that. Like that is, I think, the only reason, you know, and we talked about it earlier, but like the only reason you're playing mono white is literally just so you could beat aggro out. Because it's, you know, there's very strong combinations with other colors. You know, the Boros version's good, the Jeskai version's good, and the Jeskai version, the Boros version have better matchups into, you know, more combo-y or control-y decks. But the mono white version is just the absolute best at dealing with aggro decks. So that's the tier list. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll keep doing this as long as there's new decks to kind of review. Really, really interesting meta. I'm excited to play more standard, and I will see you in the next video.